be Friday night with an estimated jackpot of $687 million. That's $332 million for the lump sum. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Robert Half research indicates 9 out of 10 hiring managers are having difficulty hiring. Robert Half is here to help. Their recruiting professionals use proprietary AI to connect businesses with highly skilled talent. At Robert Half, they know talent. Visit roberthalf.com today.
Is this the tether?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers and Clippers are back in action tonight. The Clippers are in Houston. James Harden played 9 seasons in H-Town before moving on to Brooklyn. 4:30 tip-off on ESPN. The Lakers are at home against Sacramento. A win moves the Lakers into the 8th and final playoff spot in the Western Conference. 7:30 tip at Crypto.com. Congratulations to USC freshman Juju Watkins. She was voted Pac-12 Conference Freshman of the Year. The Compton native is also a first-team all-conference selection. She broke 3 USC records. Most points for a freshman was 751. Most points in a game, 51 at Stanford. And most games with 30 or more points, 11. The Chargers cut 9-year veteran linebacker Eric Kendricks to save $6.5 million in salary cap space. The former UCLA star lasted only 1 season with the Chargers. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Climate is king.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe that caring for the community means caring about the climate. You might have heard that we announced a pretty bold 12-month, $2 million campaign to do 4 things. Increase climate literacy, turn up the volume on communities of color in the climate conversation, connect everyday people with the resources they need to survive and thrive, and highlight frontline climate justice crusaders of color throughout this year. KBLA Talk 1580 will be bringing you insightful interviews on all of our shows to help raise your climate IQ. Each quarter this year, we will also be hosting free climate events in various communities throughout the city with food, fun, and forward-thinking conversations. Thanks to partners like LADWP, Metro, Caltrans, the Sierra Club, the California Community Foundation, the California Endowment, AQMD, MWD, and more. You'll also be hearing more about a couple of national town halls broadcasting live from Los Angeles, to which you will be invited. And we'll be rolling out a robust social media campaign on all our platforms, as well as an outdoor media campaign, all designed to educate, enlighten, and empower you in our fight for climate justice.
We want cleaner air.
Caring about the community means caring about the climate. At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe that we really can change the world. If we care enough. If we care enough. If we care enough. If we care enough.
Sip the juice, I got enough to go around, and the thought takes place uptown. I grew up on the sidewalk while on street talk, and they taught to Hawk, New York. I go to Queens for Queens to get the food from Brooklyn. Make money in Manhattan and never been tooken. Go uptown to the Bronx and boogie down, get strong on the island, recoup and lay around. Time to build my juice back up, pop stack up, suckers get smacked up. Don't doubt the clout, they know what I'm about. Knocking it off, knocking it out, shaking them up, waking them up, breaking them up, breaking them up.
I'm Tavis Smiley, and we are pleased to have you with us in this hour today. And what an hour it's going to be. That first hour was a bit much. Just hearing from that doctor, Dr. Galeria, who just returned from Gaza, was sort of heart-wrenching. And speaking of heart-wrenching, this conversation is not going to be any easier when you hear the backstory to Nightmare in Mission Hill. I am pleased to be joined for the hour by Boston Globe Associate Editor and columnist Adrian Walker to talk about this new podcast series called Nightmare in Mission Hill. It is about the 1989 shootings of Charles and Carol Stewart. Carol Stewart murdered, her unborn baby murdered. And what followed was a racist, and that's putting it mildly, a racist investigation by police and prosecutors in Boston. Here now some sound from the podcast Nightmare in Mission Hill, and then we will commence our conversation with Adrian Walker.
Mayor Wu steps to the podium with about 20 people beside her. This is no typical City Hall news conference. This is a moment.
We are here today to acknowledge the tremendous pain that the City of Boston inflicted on Black residents throughout our neighborhoods 34 years ago. The mayor's office, city officials, and the Boston Police Department took actions that directly harmed these families and continue to impact the larger community, reopening a wound that has gone untended for decades. In response to the murder of Carol Stewart and her child, and acting on a false, racist claim framing a Black man for her death, the city launched a systemic campaign targeting Black men in Mission Hill and across our neighborhoods. Black fathers, Black uncles, Black brothers, and Black sons. If you were a parent or a child or a partner or a friend, if you knew and loved a Black man in Boston, you feared for his life.
Wicked.
There was no evidence that a Black man had committed this crime.
Adrian Walker, it's an honor, sir, to have you on this program. How are you today?
It is a great pleasure to be with you, Tavis. Thanks for having me.
My delight, man. Let me just start by passing you the mic. I know this story well. Saw the documentary, talked about the documentary. Some of our audience may recall that conversation a while back, but it's this podcast series that you're behind that I want to get to. So for those who do not recall this story from 1989 or have never heard this story, let me just give you 3 or 4 minutes here at the outset to set the stage for what we're going to talk about for the rest of the hour. Tell me the story of Charles and Carol Stewart.
Okay, well, let me start with one thing at the beginning. It's a little confusing because the newspaper series is called Nightmare in Mission Hill, but the podcast and the documentary are called Murder in Boston. So I want to correct that so people can find it. But here is the story. It was October 23rd, 1989. Chuck and Carol Stewart were a couple who lived in suburban Boston, about 15 minutes north of the city. They were expecting their first child, and they were coming from a birthing class at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And they claimed that a Black man jumped in their car, shot them both. Carol died, and Chuck lived. Manhunt in Mission Hill, the neighborhood where it happened, for the alleged Black gunman. It later turned out that there was no Black gun, and I should say, when I say a manhunt, they tore through this neighborhood, particularly the Mission Main housing project. And there was no Black gunman. Chuck Stewart was eventually exposed as his wife's murderer, and he jumped off the Tobin Bridge in Boston on January 4th, 1990. So that's the story.
What is the backstory then? You told us what happened. That's the story. What's the backstory? Why did Charles Stewart do what he did?
It's not entirely clear, but, it seems, first of all, he didn't want to be married anymore, clearly. He was chasing other women. He did not want to be a father. His wife's career was taken off. He felt very threatened by that. And he wanted out. And as far as anybody can tell, that's the backstory. He had approached a couple of friends acquaintances prior to the murder to see if they would help him. They did not. But, one of the most shocking things we found, and we'll get to this, is that a lot of people knew that he had done it, and they really didn't go to police or do anything about it.
And that's why the Boston Globe is on this. As I mentioned, Adrian is associate editor and columnist at the Boston Globe. The podcast series is called Murder in Boston, and there's a lot more to explore. He just sort of teed up what happened and who was involved, but there's a great deal more to peel back in terms of the layers for how this went down and who knew about it and what they knew and when they knew and why the investigation was so racist and why they were running around just terrifying Black men and what the police knew and what prosecutors knew and why they behaved in the way they behaved nonetheless. A lot to talk about with regard to this podcast series called Murder in Boston. I am delighted to have Adrian Walker on this program. Just getting started. More when we come forward.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? this isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminding you that we keep us safe. Pro Football Hall of Famer and urban peace pioneer Jim Brown believed in just that. So he founded the AmeriCAN Foundation for Social Change in 1988, focusing on at-risk and high-risk youth in underserved schools and juvenile detention facilities, as well as adult incarceration and reentry initiatives. The core of the AmeriCAN program is its 15-chapter life skills curriculum. Mastery of these skills allows individuals to meet their academic potential, conform their behavior to acceptable societal standards, and improve the quality of their lives by equipping them with what they need to confidently and successfully contribute to society. Today, the foundation is led by its president, Monique Brown, who has been actively involved in the organization for more than 25 years. The AmeriCAN Foundation continues its work in memory of its founder, actor, philanthropist, and NFL legend Jim Brown. To get involved or make a donation, please visit AmeriCANCommunity.partners. That's AmeriCANCommunity.partners. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
If you're looking for the most epic place on Earth, let's start at the base of a massive waterfall. Then trek through the thick jungle. Then climb to the peak of a snowy mountaintop. Then once you get there, keep going. Because with intelligent 4x4 and 7 drive modes and a Nissan Pathfinder, the search is the real adventure.
Available feature. Intelligent 4x4 cannot prevent collisions or provide enhanced traction in all conditions. Always monitor traffic and weather conditions.
Helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
Boston record emergency 510.
My wife's been shot. I've been shot.
Where is this, sir?
I have no idea. I'm off. I was just coming from Tremont, Brigham and Women's Hospital.
It's 8:43 on the night of October 23rd, 1989.
Where are you right now, sir? Can you indicate to me?
No, I don't know. He made us go to an abandoned area.
A man calls 911 from his car phone. He's lost somewhere in Boston.
Okay, sir. Can you see out the windows? Can you tell me where you are, please?
No. I don't know. I don't see any signs. Oh, God.
Chuck Stewart is in the driver's seat. His wife, Carol, is next to him. She's 7 months pregnant.
Okay, has your wife been shot as well?
Yes. In the head.
Moments ago, they were at a nearby hospital, taking a birthing class, preparing to welcome their first child.
Okay, sir, bear with me now. Stand by. Stay on the phone with me.
Chuck's from the suburbs. He doesn't live around here. All he knows is that he's on the wrong side of Huntington Avenue, and he's scared.
It is eerie, and that's the best word I can come up with off the top of my head, Adrian Walker, but it is eerie to hear his voice on that 911 call when he knew then, obviously full well, that he was lying. He had made this entire thing up, and black men all over Boston are being falsely accused and harassed and rounded up as the story develops. We'll get to that part in just a moment. But as the guy behind this podcast, A Murder in Boston, when you first heard that, and you all are working to produce this series, how did you feel when you hear his voice coming through those headphones, heard his voice coming through those headphones?
You know, I've heard that tape countless times, and it's still chilling to me.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. For just the reasons you say. I mean, to know that every word of what you're saying is a lie,
yeah,
and to still deliver it that way is just it just speaks to what a psychopath this man really was.
Yeah. Let me stand back and get a 360 view, get a 35,000 foot view, and then we'll hone in a little bit better. Tell me what your approach was, has been with this podcast series, and I ask that because when you are attacking the subjects that have been written about in the Boston Globe and other places, when there's been a documentary about it, when people who were, of course, around then sort of remember and recall. This is not something that people are altogether unfamiliar with, and so here you come now trying to give it a treatment that it has not been subject to before. Give me a sense of your approach and how and what you wanted to tell as a story.
Well, let me start at the beginning,
Sure.
Tavis, and say that in 1989, when this happened, I was a new reporter at the Boston Globe. This happened 5 months after I started at the Globe. So I was involved in the coverage of the original story.
Mm-hmm.
And the Stewart case, it had been such an explosion in the city. It was one of those stories that those of us who covered it, never really forgot it. And I would revisit it, at times after I became a columnist. I would write about it on anniversaries when major figures in the case died and so forth. In 2021, we had a group of reporters who were working on a bunch of really good stories about police misconduct involving the Boston Police Department. And we started thinking about how there was a long history of this kind of misconduct, and you could trace it all the way to the Stewart case. And, I started thinking about the way the case was beginning to be forgotten, the way a lot of people who live here really did not know that much about it. And I thought that it was a great time. It wasn't just me, but me and a group of editors also thought that it was a great time to really revisit it, go deep at it, and see what we could find that was new. And as far as the approach is concerned, we put together a team, and we put together a list of people who were involved in the case or whose lives have been touched by the case. We wanted to really focus on the stories of people in Mission Hill because we thought that was something that had been overlooked in the original coverage or undercovered in the original coverage. We really wanted it to be driven by the way it affected the people on the ground there. And I always say I thought it would take a year, and it took 2.5 years. But I'm glad we did it.
Yeah. Let me just interrogate right quick your comment earlier, Adrian, that many people had forgotten about this. Time has a way of marching on, and people do have amnesia. Don't we know that right now in real time? A whole lot of folk got amnesia about what happened January the 6th. A whole lot of folk got amnesia about what happened during the Trump era, and he's rolling to victory as of yesterday on Super Tuesday. So amnesia is uniquely American in a variety of ways. I digress on that point for now, but you talked about the fact that many people had forgotten about this. And here's my question. You've heard these refrains time and time again that the past is the past. The past is prologue. What's dead ought to be buried. I could do this all day long if I had the time, but you take my point. What is the value to your mind of resurrecting this horrific story all these years later?
The value to my mind of resurrecting, this is a great question. The value to my mind of resurrecting all these stories is, number one, we still live with its legacy.
Mm-hmm.
There's thousands of people here who went through this who have not forgotten about it. You hear the voices of a lot of them in our podcast. But also remember that it was prompted by stuff that was going on. The idea of going back to look at it was prompted by stuff that was going on at the time. So we still live with these kinds of police abuses, and many of the problems that drove this are still very much with us. So I don't buy that it's all in the past. I know it's not all in the past. And one of the things going back to stories like this can do is it can help us come to terms with it and see how these things are still affecting our daily lives.
Give the national audience a better understanding of the journey of the Boston Police Department. We'll get to their role in this mess as we move through this hour. It occurs to me that, and you know this well, having been at the Boston Globe all these years, that we have something in common. That is, say, Boston and Los Angeles, where I sit right now. There was a particular gentleman who was police chief in both cities, and you know of who I speak, of course. He was police chief in Boston, police chief here in Los Angeles. So we have that in common, and we have had and still have our own drama with police misconduct in the city of LA, but that ain't nothing new. And for cities listening this conversation all across the country right now, Chicago, Philadelphia, New Orleans, D.C., New York, and beyond, they have the same kinds of issues. But since we're talking about Boston, before I get again more expressly into this case, Murder in Boston and your podcast series, tell me more about the Boston Police Department's journey as it relates to misconduct, police brutality, false accusations? You tell me, Adrian Walker.
Well, this was we'll get deeper into the details, like you said later, but, this was a time when there was a huge amount of tension between the police and the community. They were pursuing a strategy called stop and frisk, which involved basically just searching young men, mostly young black men, on the street on the flimsiest of pretexts, which was part of what laid the groundwork for what happened during Stewart. As for the journey, eventually after Stewart, they came to realize there needed to be some reforms, and we get into this era of community policing and so forth. But the police misconduct has never completely gone away, not by a long shot.
Yeah.
So the whole question of and this case led to a whole generation of incredible distrust between the police and the community, and in that sense, we're still living with it.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to be cute. We were talking about Bill Bratton, of course. Bill Bratton was police chief in Boston and police chief here in L.A. For those listening nationally who are wondering who I was talking about, his name is Bill Bratton. And I wasn't trying to be cute, but that's who it was. So to your point about distrust, again, I'm going to dig more deeply into these the pieces of this story that you cover in the podcast series Murder in Boston in a moment. But tell me what this did regarding the trust or lack thereof that black folk already had in the Boston Police Department.
Well, as you say, it was already there, and this only made it much worse. Because the police had just gone through this black and brown neighborhood and violated everybody's rights. And in the wake of it, we got a commission, and they made a bunch of recommendations, and most of the recommendations were ignored. So things didn't get better for a really long time. The first recommendation the commission made, it was called the St. Clair Commission, was to fire the police commissioner, which the mayor refused to do. The commissioner at the time, Mickey Roach, stayed for 2 more years. And funny, you should mention Bratton. Bratton was eventually his replacement.
Mm-hmm. Nope, I remember that well. Let me get inside this now. Tell me what you learned in your research as you put this Murder in Boston podcast series together. I asked you this question earlier, but I want to come at it a different way. Obviously, we can't get inside the head of Charles Stewart, but tell me more about the backstory. They had been to the hospital that night. His wife was 7 months pregnant. Just take me back to the early beginnings of his build up to this horrific moment.
Well, they had met working together in a restaurant in Revere. Revere's a suburb just north of Boston. And they had met at the Driftwood. They became a couple. She became a lawyer. He was working in managing a First store on Newberry Street, this fancy street in Boston. And they, and they were a pretty typical young suburban couple. And, one of the things about revisiting this is that we never had much sense of what they were like as people. But, in the wake of it, it turns out that he was just this kind of madman. And obviously, that's who kills their wives.
Yeah.
And, and she was this totally delightful person.
When you
so
say,
that was sort of their backstory.
When you say madman, Adrian, I mean, there are a lot of ways to take that. And obviously, you got to be a madman to your point to kill your wife like this and blame a black man for it. But when you say madman, unpack that for me. What do you mean by that?
Well, it turns out that he had lied about all kinds of things. He had lied about going to Brown University. He had lied about being a college football star. He was, always portraying himself as this loyal, doting husband, when in fact he was hitting on women left and right, one in particular. So there were a lot of things about Chuck Stewart that were not as they appeared at all.
Yep. So the night in question, tell me what happens. Give me some detail of what happens on this fateful night.
So on the night in question, they're at Brigham and Women's Hospital, which has this huge maternity section. As I say in the podcast, half of Boston was born there. And, they're in this class, and it's basically, what to expect when you're expecting. They get in their cars. They take this weird route that is not on the way home because it turns out he has these, other plans. And somewhere along the way, we don't know where exactly, he shoots her and he shoots himself in the abdomen. And then he calls 911. I've been shot. My wife's been shot. I don't know where I am. There's nobody around, which was a lie because he was on this heavily traveled street where there would have been a lot of people around. And, she goes to one hospital. He goes to another hospital. She delivers the baby, who dies 17 days later, tragically. She dies that night, and he hangs on at the other hospital that he is taken to. The mayor goes to the hospital she's in. It was actually Brigham and Women's, the hospital they had come from. And Mayor Ray Flynn says, we're going to put every single available detective on this case, and right away, it is treated as this unusual, exceptional murder, this thing we've got to get to the bottom of right away, and that kind of sets all the bad stuff in motion.
Yep. Let's talk about the bad stuff that got set in motion. Tell me about the way that the mayor and the police and prosecutors approached this from the very beginning.
Right from the very beginning, they approached this. And, and again, this is a time in Boston where there are a lot of murders. There are somebody's getting murdered every other night. But this is not like any other murder. She's white, she's pregnant, the assailant is some random black guy. We're going to go find the black guy. This had all happened right next to a big housing project called Mission Main. And they just start going through Mission Main. And I mean, literally knocking people's doors down, going through units and, trying to find. And the only description they had, by the way, was it's a skinny black man with an Adidas tracksuit. And if you remember from 1989, everybody had an Adidas tracksuit, right? This is not much.
Run DMC.
Run DMC, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So first, there's one suspect, a poor guy named Alan Swanson. Swanson and his girlfriend are squatting in an apartment, and, they get told he's the guy, he's got a tracksuit. They get Swanson, they hold him in jail. There's no evidence tying him to the crime whatsoever, which, by the way, did not make them release him. They held him for 10 days for nothing. And then the second suspect is a guy named Willie Bennett, who very nearly got charged with this murder. And Bennett, in fact, was eventually picked out of a lineup by Chuck Stewart just before Stewart's brother went to police and blew up the whole story.
And how do I read that? That part of the story has always been fascinating for me. Here's a guy, Charles Stewart, who who masterminds this heinous act, kills his wife, the baby dies, and he, my word, not yours, essentially saves Mr. Bennett by not identifying him necessarily in a lineup where it could have cost him a lot of drama. What do we make of that? Is that some sort of redeeming quality that I should read about Charles Stewart?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, he did pick Bennett out of the lineup.
Yeah.
He did say, it's number 3. He's the guy who did it.
Yeah.
Knowing all the time that he was the one who did it. And, one thing I did not say about the night of the murder was that Stewart's brother, Matthew, his younger brother, meets him at the crime scene and takes the gun, her engagement ring, and some other stuff, and he throws the gun into a river.
Yeah.
So he's an accomplice. And this is the brother who eventually ends up going to the police. And I think the reason he went to the police was because he thought he would end up being implicated in some way, and he turned his brother in first.
Yeah. What happens to Bennett when he's picked out of this lineup?
Well, Bennett's picked out of this lineup, and Stewart jumps off the bridge before Bennett can be indicted. But Bennett gets charged with a different crime. Bennett is charged with robbing a video store in Brookline, just outside of Boston. And he is convicted on that and eventually serves 12 years.
Served how long?
12 years.
Yeah.
For robbing a video store, which is, 4 times what you would get now, even if there were video stores.
Yeah.
And it really destroys his life.
Yeah. That can only be read, Adrian, to my mind, as a tragedy inside of a tragedy.
It is absolutely a tragedy, and it was a tragedy for the entire Bennett family. They were one of the families, of course, where police knocked down the door. Willie Bennett's mother eventually dies of a heart attack. A couple of years later, but several years later. But his whole family says that, her life was never the same after this. None of their lives were ever the same after this. And in fact, when the mayor made the apology that you played at the beginning of the show, the Bennett family was standing by him.
Yep. We'll talk about that apology from Boston Mayor Michelle Wu and a great deal more about this horrific story in Boston back in 1989 involving Charles and Carol Stewart. The podcast series is called Murder in Boston. Boston Globe Associate Editor and columnist Adrian Walker is our guest right now on Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez is being hit with new charges. The Democrat was indicted on 12 new criminal charges, including conspiracy to commit bribery, fraud, extortion, and conspiracy for a public official to act as a foreign agent. The charges are related to a years-long corruption and bribery scheme involving the governments of Egypt and Qatar. An Eastern Washington school is under fire after encouraging students to dress up as African-American slaves. The Spokesman Review reports Wilson Elementary School in Spokane made the suggestion Friday in a flyer highlighting an upcoming jazz music performance. The flyer invites families to, quote, take a trip from today way back to the times of slavery in America, and goes on to suggest that students dress up as slaves and hobos for that concert. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Robert Half research indicates 9 out of 10 hiring managers are having difficulty hiring. Robert Half is here to help. Their recruiting professionals use proprietary AI to connect businesses with highly skilled talent. At Robert Half, they know talent. Visit roberthalf.com today.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers and Clippers are back in action tonight. The Clippers are in Houston. James Harden played 9 seasons in H-Town before moving on to Brooklyn. 4:30 tip-off on ESPN. The Lakers are at home against Sacramento. A win moves the Lakers into the 8th and final playoff spot in the Western Conference. 7:30 tip at Crypto.com. Congratulations to USC freshman Juju Watkins. She was voted Pac-12 Conference Freshman of the Year. The Compton native is also a first-team all-conference selection. She broke 3 USC records. Most points for a freshman was 751. Most points in a game, 51 at Stanford. And most games with 30 or more points, 11. The Chargers cut 9-year veteran linebacker Eric Kendricks to save $6.5 million in salary cap space. The former UCLA star lasted only 1 season with the Chargers. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences? Then wake up weekends at 7 a.m. with Urban Family Focus and get the wisdom, opportunity, resources, and motivation to live your best life. Join the conversation on Urban Family Focus Saturday and Sunday at 7 a.m.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Some people just know the best rate for you is a rate based on you with Allstate, not one based on anyone else. So if you drive safely, you could save money. Good to know. Visit allstate.com or call for a quote today.
Psst. Hey, I have a secret. I use Secret Whole Body Deodorant because more than just my armpits stink.
Oh, can I use it where my bra rubs under my...
Oh, yeah.
And what about down there? You know, my...
Totally. 4 out of 5 gynecologists would recommend it. So I tried it, and now I get 72 hours of freshness from my pits to my...
Ooh, I love that it's a spray.
Me too. And it comes in sticks and creams, too. Go get your Secret Whole Body Deodorant.
Paid for by government.com. Did you know the United States Mint has issued a new Morgan silver dollar coin in proof condition for the first time? Not only that, they are also minted in 99.9% pure silver for the first time ever in history. Coin experts are calling this an amazing opportunity for anyone that knows the enduring popularity of Morgans. But you must hurry. Only 400,000 of these legal tender silver dollars were issued. These first ever Morgan silver dollars are brand new with stunning mirror-like finish, minted by the iconic San Francisco Mint. Call now and you're guaranteed a new first ever 99.9% pure silver proof Morgan dollar. To learn more, call 1-800-973-9717. If you order now, you will receive a free coin collector bonus pack, a $25 value, free with every order. Call 1-800-973-9717 now to secure your new Morgan silver dollars before they are gone. That's 1-800-973-9717.
Made fresh daily in the Mert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Charles had everything going for him. A top-paying job, a good life, a good wife, a baby boy on the way any day. A gentleman attitude is all he displayed. Cal was the wife he loved and adored. Her family and friends treated him like an ambassador. One night on the other side of town, a police dispatcher picked up a weird sound. Charles on the car phone asking for help, claiming a burglar shot his wife and himself. His pregnant wife lay slumped over. Her dreams corrupted, a young life over. Extensive searches throughout the projects put a lot of people through misery and wreck. Everyone a suspect till someone was found. Interrogated cause his skin was brown. Then there was Bennett, guilty until proven so. But soon as the case started moving slow, what do you know? Sure as the seagull gets web-toed, Charles was the culprit. The whole plot was an insurance scam. Charles and his brother came up with a plan. Kill Carol, collect the big checks, blame it on a black man. What the heck? Just before the story was known, Charles had a film that his cover was blown. So he jumped off a bridge, committed suicide. This is how it is on the wild side.
I'm Tavis Smiley. It is the wild side. Our guest in this hour is Adrian Walker, Boston Globe Associate Editor and columnist. And he's the guy behind this podcast series, Murder in Boston, about the case of Charles Stewart. And you just heard in those lyrics to that track, it pretty much laid it out, what happened. And it is, all these years later, still just mind-boggling that this story went down the way that it did. And so I'm grateful to Adrian Walker and the team at the Boston Globe for this podcast series, once again, called Murder in Boston. There are a couple things I want to ask about now, Adrian. You made reference earlier in this conversation, of course, to the fact that Ray Flynn was the mayor of Boston when this went down back in 1989. We played earlier in this conversation some sound from Boston Mayor Michelle Wu offering an apology. I want to just ask you to juxtapose these two mayors, because when Charles Stewart lied and said, of course, that a black man had killed his pregnant wife in October of '89, Ray Flynn believed him, and for that matter, to your point, so did pretty much everybody else who's white in Boston. Everybody believed this story initially. But juxtapose Ray Lynn and Michelle Wu, and tell me what you think in light of all that ultimately happened, including Stewart jumping off a bridge and killing himself after his brother turned him in, what this says about Ray Flynn's legacy.
Well, this podcast and this story is certainly not good for Ray Flynn's legacy. Ray Flynn was a guy from South Boston who had gotten elected mayor in 1983 and promoted himself as a racial healer, a person who could bring black and white people together in a city that is notorious, of course, for its history of racial problems. Mm-hmm. And but the Stewart case was not good for him. He immediately believed the story, and I think, and he didn't do anything to calm anything down, and he certainly never apologized. He did appear once briefly at the Bennett's home after Willie Bennett was released. The Bennetts will tell you he was there less than 5 minutes and didn't even sit down. And, Ray Flynn's basic message at the time was, let's all forget this and put it behind us and move on. Michelle Wu, a generation later, 34 years later, has done just the opposite. She is a person who has, I don't know how much she knew about this case before all the recent reporting on it. I think she knew it in sort of vague outlines, but not in any detail. But she's really been horrified by what she learned. And, I think it was one of her finest moments this year. It was such a full-throated, clear apology. No holds barred. She called it racist. She said it was awful. She apologized to the family. She apologized to Boston's entire Black community. And that apology had been a very long time coming. So it meant a lot to thousands of people.
I was about to ask, to your final point, how did her words land on the community?
Well, I'll tell you, I was in the room when she issued that apology. And it was one of the most emotional, probably the most emotional City Hall event I've ever been to. It really landed. And to put it in context, I mean, when I was calling people at the beginning of this, we were looking for people to talk to, particularly Black people, they wanted to talk about this. They had been waiting for someone to acknowledge their pain, validate their pain, listen to their stories. And for her to stand up and say what no mayor has stood up and said for 30 plus years, it meant a ton to people. Absolutely.
Let me drill down on that for a second. And I think you'll appreciate, hope you will, at least why I'm asking this question. What did you learn in that moment, indeed being a Black man yourself, about the power of a sincere apology? And I think you take the frame that I'm putting us in.
Oh, yeah, I do. I learned a lot about how powerful it was. One of the things I learned was about myself. I learned that I was one of the people who had been waiting to hear somebody say these words. Everybody has carried this story with them for all of these years, and to hear somebody in that position of authority, and I'm around people in positions of authority every day.
Sure.
But to hear somebody in that position of authority stand up and say, this was racist, this was wrong, this was unconscionable, this never should have happened. I know this apology is not enough. It's just a first step. It meant a lot.
Yeah.
It said a lot to me.
Yeah, I told this story a couple weeks ago on this program. We were in some other conversation about something which I cannot recall right now, Adrian. But this came up, and I made the point that I was traveling with Bill Clinton when he went to Africa, to the continent during his presidency. He went to 7 or 8 different countries, and I was on the plane with him for that trip. And we sat down for a conversation live on national television while we were in Joburg in South Africa. And I asked him on camera whether or not while he was on African soil, he would take the opportunity to apologize for American slavery. And he did the Bill Clinton, walked around the question and, answered it in the way he chose to answer it. But I thought about it, of course, before I asked the question. I thought about it while I was asking, while he was answering, and I thought about it for all these years since. What a difference it might have made even then if the President of the United States had apologized for American slavery while he was on African soil. He did not do it then. No president has done it since then. And so that's why I asked that question in part about the power. It's one thing to talk about reparations and what we are owed, but it has to start with somebody just sincerely apologizing. And I would have loved to have been in that room to have seen and felt what you all felt when you heard the mayor of the city 34 years later just apologize for the city and the police and the prosecutors being wrong, man.
That's right. You're right. For them being wrong and not caring what they were doing to a community.
Yeah.
And not caring about the effect it was having. Yeah, I mean, and, Michelle Wu was, a small child. She was, I guess, 4 years old, 5 years old, living in another part of the country at the time. It had nothing to do with her. But it's not about that, right? She is the symbol of the city, right? She is the leader of the city. And she took that ownership, which other mayors have, punted on. Other mayors have said, hey, I wasn't here. Go talk to Ray. And she did not do that,
Yeah. No, it's a powerful moment. It comes through, the power of that moment comes through even the clip that we played earlier in this conversation. More with Adrian Walker of the Boston Globe when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
From Leimert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont. a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.